James Winters never meant to become a hero. As a salvage specialist working the outer rim of human space, he'd built his reputation on discretion and reliability. His ship, the Star Weaver, had seen him through countless legitimate salvage operations, and perhaps a few questionable ones. But what he found in the derelict Narcissus station would change everything. The station hung silent in space, its once bustling corridors now empty save for floating debris and echoes of its dark past. James moved carefully through the abandoned structure, his magnetic boots clicking against the metal floor as he searched for salvageable tech. His scanner swept methodically across walls and through doorways, looking for anything worth the fuel he'd burned getting here. Nothing but stripped panels and dead power cells, he muttered to himself, his breath fogging slightly in his helmet. The station's life support barely functioned, keeping just enough atmosphere to prevent total structural decay. He was about to turn back when his scanner picked up an anomalous reading from behind a sealed door. The door's emergency release yielded to his tools, revealing what had once been private quarters. Among the scattered belongings, a data crystal caught his eye, still intact, still powered by its own internal source. James plugged it into his suit's reader, and a holographic message flickered to life. The figure that appeared was Talaxian, tall and graceful with iridescent skin that shifted between deep purple and midnight blue. Despite her obvious fear, she held herself with dignity as she spoke, "To whoever finds this, I am Rhodia of House Vex. I record this hoping someone might help others avoid my fate. The Crimson Syndicate operates a trafficking ring through this sector, targeting those they consider exotic. I was taken from my diplomatic vessel, but I am only one of many. They're holding us at a facility on Kara's Prime, disguised as a private medical center. If you're watching this, please, help us." James sat in silence long after the message ended, his conscience warring with his survival instinct. Kara's Prime was deep in Syndicate territory. Going there would mean risking everything he'd built. Yet the thought of walking away made his stomach turn. He returned to the Star Weaver, running his hand along her worn hull as he thought. The ship's AI chirped to life as he entered the cockpit. "Welcome back, James. Salvage operation concluded?" "Not exactly, Rose," he replied to the AI, dropping into the pilot's seat. "Pull up everything we have on Kara's Prime, specifically any facilities that might match a medical center front." "James," Rose's voice held a note of concern, "Kara's Prime is outside our usual operational parameters. The risk assessment dash." "I know, Rose. But some risks are worth taking." He began plotting a course, watching as the NAV computer calculated jump points. "We're going to need some supplies first. Set course for Haven Station, and start running scenarios for infiltrating a Syndicate facility." As the Star Weaver's engines hummed to life, James reviewed the message again. His fingers traced the familiar scars on his neck, remnants of his own past brush with slavery, before he'd won his freedom and his ship. He'd sworn then to never turn his back on others in similar circumstances. "Rose, access my secure account. Transfer all funds to our emergency reserves." He pulled up the station's last known manifest, looking for anything that might help identify other victims or trafficking patterns. The AI's pause lasted exactly 2.3 seconds. "All funds transferred. James, whatever you're planning, the odds of success dash." "Sometimes it's not about the odds, Rose. It's about doing what's right." He settled into his chair, watching the stars stretch into lines as they entered hyperspace. "Besides, we've beat worse odds before." The Star Weaver accelerated smoothly into the jump point, carrying her crew toward a mission that would test not just their skills and resources, but their very humanity. As James studied the data he'd recovered, he began forming a plan, one that would require every trick he'd learned in his years on the Rim, and probably a few he'd have to invent along the way. Deep in the ship's systems, Rose silently began optimizing their combat routines and updating their stealth protocols. She'd been with James long enough to know that once he set his mind to something, particularly something involving helping others, there would be no turning back. The best she could do was help him survive what was coming. The stars streaked by outside, each one bringing them closer to Kara's prime, and to a confrontation that would change not just their lives, but potentially the lives of countless others trapped in the Syndicate's web. James Winters may never have meant to become a hero, but sometimes the universe had other plans. Haven Station proved to be exactly what James needed, a nexus of information and opportunity where credits could buy almost anything, including a new identity. The massive space station's lower levels teemed with life forms from across the galaxy, perfect for gathering intelligence without drawing attention. "Your credentials are ready, Mr. Vale," the Syrian forger announced, her crystalline fingers extending a data chip. "Corporate medical researcher with expertise in xenobiology. All the necessary licenses and background data are included." James verified the credentials on his secure tablet. "Thorough work, as always, Nix. For what you paid, it should be." She hesitated, her crystalline structure shifting to a more serious hue. "James, word is the Crimson Syndicate's been expanding their operation on Kara's prime. Whatever you're planning, be careful." He nodded, tucking the chip away. "Any other intel worth sharing?" "The facility you're interested in, officially it's the Kara's Institute for Xenological Medicine. Security's tight, but they're always looking for new talent. Especially now, with their latest research project." The disgust in her voice was clear. Back on the Star Weaver, James and Rose spent 3 days establishing his cover. The AI helped him memorize enough medical terminology to pass casual inspection, while he modified his ship's transponder codes and appearance. "The Institute's hiring database has been updated with your credentials," Rose reported. "Initial screening algorithms have flagged you as a potential candidate. Now we wait." The call came faster than expected. A polite message from the Institute's hiring director, requesting an initial interview. James straightened his newly acquired medical uniform, checking his reflection. The expensive fabric and precise cut suggested success without ostentation, exactly the image he needed to project. "Remember," Rose cautioned as he prepared to leave, "the Institute's internal systems are isolated from the main network. Once you're inside, I won't be able to help directly. Focus on monitoring external communications and security patterns," he replied. "And keep our exit strategies updated." The Institute rose from Kara's prime's rusty surface like a temple of modern medicine, all gleaming white surfaces and sophisticated architecture. James noted the subtle security measures, guard posts disguised as administrative stations, weapon scanners hidden in decorative arches, and enough surveillance coverage to track every movement. Director Venn, a tall Centaurian with silver-scaled skin, conducted the interview personally. "Your research history is impressive, Mr. Vale. Particularly your work with adaptive physiologies." "I believe in pushing boundaries," James replied carefully, watching the director's reactions. "There's so much we can learn from different species." "Indeed." Venn's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We're conducting several groundbreaking studies here. Projects that require discretion." The tour that followed revealed both more and less than James expected. The upper levels were genuinely dedicated to medical research, providing perfect cover for whatever happened in the restricted lower sections. He caught glimpses of secured elevators, unmarked doors, and staff with military bearing poorly disguised as medical personnel. "We'll need references, of course," Venn said as the tour concluded. "And there's our standard security screening." "Naturally." James produced a carefully curated list of contacts, all aliases established over the past year, each backed by enough digital history to withstand scrutiny. "I look forward to hearing from you." Later, in a rented apartment in the city, James reviewed his findings. "Rose, compare the building schematics with what we observed. Look for discrepancies." The AI projected a holographic model of the Institute. "The official plans show only 2 sublevels, but power consumption and thermal signatures suggest at least 4. There's also an unusual amount of shielding around this section. A portion of the model highlighted in red. Holding cells, James muttered. Probably where they're keeping Rhodia and the others. We'll need access to those lower levels. The security screening will be thorough, Rose warned. They'll investigate every detail of your background. Good thing we gave them plenty to find. James smiled grimly. Sometimes the best way to hide something is to bury it under a mountain of legitimate data. The next week brought more interviews, more tours, more careful probing of the Institute's defenses. James played his role perfectly, competent but not brilliant, ambitious but not threatening. He let slip carefully crafted hints about financial pressures, about being willing to overlook certain ethical concerns for the right opportunity. Director Venn called him personally with the job offer. Welcome to the Institute, Mr. Vale. You'll be working on some of our most sensitive projects. I trust you understand the need for absolute confidentiality? Completely, Director. When do I start? Tomorrow. Oh, and Mr. Vale? Do remember that we take security very seriously here. Any breach of protocol would have unfortunate consequences. James ended the call, his expression hardening. Rose, initiate Phase 2. It's time to start introducing some subtle glitches into their security systems. Initiating now, the AI confirmed. James. I've been analyzing their response patterns. If we're discovered We won't be, he interrupted. Because we're not just going to break in. We're going to make them invite us into their most secure areas. As night fell over Kara's Prime, James reviewed the building's security footage one more time. Somewhere in those lower levels, Rhodia and countless others waited in darkness. Tomorrow, he would begin the delicate process of gaining their captors' trust while searching for a way to free them. The stars outside his window seemed dimmer here, as if even they turned away from what happened in the Institute's shadows. But James Winters had long ago learned that the darker the night, the more important it was to carry your own light. James's first week at the Institute passed in a carefully orchestrated dance of competence and calculated mistakes. He worked diligently on the legitimate research projects assigned to him, gradually earning the trust of his colleagues while studying the facility's rhythms and routines. It was during his second week that Director Venn finally broached the subject James had been waiting for. Your work has impressed us, Mr. Vale, the Centaurian said, leading him toward one of the restricted elevators. We have a special project that might interest you. One that requires someone with your flexible approach to traditional ethics. The elevator descended past the official sublevels, its smooth motion belying the weight of the moment. James kept his expression neutral even as his heart raced. Everything hinged on his reaction to what came next. The doors opened onto a stark white corridor patrolled by guards in medical uniforms. Welcome to our Advanced Research Division, Venn announced with pride. Here we study the unique biological properties of various species. Properties that could revolutionize medicine, for those who can afford it. They passed sealed rooms with observation windows. Inside each, James saw beings from across the galaxy, all valuable for their unique biological traits, all held against their will. He forced himself to nod with professional interest, even as rage burned in his chest. Fascinating subjects, he commented, his voice steady. Though containment must present unique challenges. Venn smiled coldly. We have effective methods of ensuring cooperation. Speaking of which. He paused before a door near the end of the corridor. I believe you'll find this subject particularly interesting. The room beyond the door took James's breath away. Rhodia stood in a containment field, her iridescent skin shifting between deep purples and blues just as he'd seen in her message. She wore simple medical garments, but carried herself with unmistakable dignity. Remarkable cellular regeneration capabilities, Venn explained clinically. We've barely scratched the surface of her potential applications. Perhaps you'd like to review our current research protocols? James approached the containment field, scanner in hand. Rhodia's eyes met his, brilliant gold irises that showed no fear, only careful observation. She'd survived this long by reading people, he realized. By knowing when to resist and when to comply. I'll need time to review the existing data, he said professionally. And to design some new testing parameters. Of course. Ven seemed pleased with his response. You'll have full access to this subject. Don't worry about damaging the specimen, as I said, her regenerative capabilities are remarkable. Later that night, in his apartment, James paced restlessly while Rose analyzed the day's data. They're monitoring everything in that section, the AI reported. Audio, visual, thermal, even pheromone levels. Breaking her out directly would be suicide. Then we don't break her out, James replied. We make them move her. He pulled up a holographic display of the facility's layout. Show me all scheduled specimen transfers from the past month. As patterns emerged from the data, James began to formulate a plan. He would need time to implement it, time to gain more trust, to put pieces in place, and most importantly, to communicate his intentions to Rhodia without alerting their watchers. Over the next few weeks, James established a routine of daily visits to Rhodia's cell, ostensibly conducting research. He worked with meticulous care, always appearing to follow protocols while actually inflicting minimal discomfort. More importantly, he talked as he worked, seemingly thinking out loud about cellular structures and regeneration rates, but actually weaving encoded messages. Rhodia proved to be brilliantly quick at picking up his subtle communications. She responded in kind, sharing crucial information about guard rotations, security protocols, and other captives through carefully worded responses to his medical questions. Fascinating how the regeneration accelerates under certain wavelengths, she commented one day, which told him when the security systems underwent maintenance. Though the effect varies with the facility's power cycles, letting him know about periodic vulnerabilities in the containment fields. The breakthrough came during his third week of research. Director, James reported, keeping his voice carefully controlled, I've detected some unusual patterns in the subject's cellular response. The readings suggest a potential degradation of the very properties we're trying to study. Ven frowned at the data displays. Explain. The containment field's radiation signature is interfering with the regenerative process. If this continues, we risk permanent damage to the specimen. I recommend transferring her to the shielded labs in Section C for detailed analysis. Those labs are used for our most dangerous specimens, Ven objected. Exactly. They're our most secure facilities, and their shielding would protect both the subject and our investment. James held his breath, watching Ven consider the carefully crafted lie. Very well. Schedule the transfer for next week. I want a full protocol proposal on my desk tomorrow. That night, James sent a coded burst transmission to Rose. Phase 3 begins soon. Have our outside resources standing by. Already done, the AI confirmed. The underground network is ready to move when we give the signal. But James, getting her out of the secure lab won't be easy. No, he agreed, studying the facility maps again. But it's our best chance. Sometimes the most secure place is also the most vulnerable, if you know how to use that security against itself. In her cell, Rhodia waited patiently, her iridescent skin dimmed to midnight blue in the low light. She had recognized something in the human's eyes from their first meeting, not just kindness, but a deep understanding of captivity. When he looked at her, he didn't see a specimen or a test subject. He saw a person. Hope, she had learned, was a dangerous thing in captivity. But as she reviewed the subtle messages James had shared, she allowed herself to feel it again. Not just hope for herself, but for all the others trapped in this sterile hell. Change was coming, and it would begin in the most secure lab in the facility, exactly where their captors would least expect it. The day of transfer arrived with a tension that hung in the air like static before a storm. James arrived early, methodically checking his equipment while reviewing the plan in his mind. Every detail had to be perfect, lives depended on it. Transfer protocol initiated, he announced for the benefit of the security recordings. Subject appears stable for transport. He approached Rhodia's containment field, scanner in hand. Their eyes met briefly, volumes passing in that fractional moment of contact. The containment field hummed as it shifted into transport mode. 4 guards entered, standard procedure for high-value specimen transfers. James noted their positions, their weapons, the way they moved. Professionals, but overconfident in their security systems. Beginning transit to Section C, James declared, falling into step beside the floating containment field. Rhodia stood perfectly still within it, her iridescent skin dulled to a deep blue that spoke of calm focus rather than fear. They moved through the facility's stark corridors, passing other researchers who barely glanced their way. Just another routine transfer in a facility full of secrets. The secure labs of Section C waited below, accessed by a dedicated elevator that required both biometric scanning and security codes. As they descended, James felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Everything they'd planned hinged on the next few minutes. His hand brushed against his lab coat pocket, feeling the small device hidden there. The elevator doors opened onto Section C, a reinforced chamber designed to contain the facility's most dangerous specimens. Originally built to handle hostile xenomorphs, it would now serve a very different purpose. Preparing containment cell, James announced, moving to the control panel. His fingers danced across the interface, entering the complex sequence of commands he'd memorized. To any observer, it would appear he was simply configuring the cell's parameters. The guards took up their positions, professional but relaxed. This deep in the facility's most secure section, they expected no trouble. That assumption was their first mistake. James pressed the final key in his sequence. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then every light in Section C flickered simultaneously. Minor power fluctuation, he said calmly, even as alerts began flashing across the control panels. Probably feedback from the containment systems. I'll just... The lights went out completely, plunging the lab into darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in almost instantly, but those crucial seconds of darkness were all they needed. Rose, monitoring from the Star Weaver, had timed her system-wide malfunction perfectly. As backup power engaged, James was already moving. The small device from his pocket, a targeted EMP generator disguised as a medical scanner, had disrupted the local security systems just long enough. Rhodia's containment field shimmered and died. She moved with liquid grace, decades of diplomatic combat training evident in every motion. Before the guards could react, she had disarmed the nearest one and positioned herself behind him as a shield. James didn't waste the advantage of surprise. He dropped 2 guards with precise strikes before they could bring their weapons to bear. Using their own security protocols against them, they were hesitant to fire in a lab full of sensitive equipment. Security breach in Section C. The last guard managed to hit his alarm before Rhodia rendered him unconscious. Klaxons began blaring throughout the facility. Rose, execute emergency protocol Alpha, James commanded into his hidden communicator. Throughout the Institute, carefully planted subroutines began creating chaos, security doors cycling randomly, environmental systems going haywire, and most importantly, other containment fields starting to fail. This way. James led Rhodia to a maintenance access panel they'd identified in their planning. Beyond it lay a narrow service tunnel, part of the facility's original construction, virtually forgotten by current security protocols. They moved quickly through the tunnel as chaos erupted above them. Rose's digital assault had worked better than they'd hoped, the facility's security forces would be overwhelmed trying to contain multiple escapes across several levels. The others, Rhodia gasped as they ran. We can't just dash. Already handled, James assured her. Underground networks moving in, using the confusion to get people out through multiple routes. We're the distraction they need. They emerged in a lower maintenance bay, exactly where they'd planned. An industrial waste disposal unit waited, modified by Rose's careful hacking to bypass its normal safety protocols. Hold tight, James warned, helping Rhodia into the unit. This part isn't pleasant. The disposal unit activated, sending them shooting through the facility's waste reclamation system. They emerged 2 kilometers away, in a drainage outlet beyond the Institute's security perimeter. James's legs buckled as they hit the ground, his muscles screaming from the impact. Rhodia caught him before he could fall, her strength surprising despite her ordeal. You came back for us, she said softly. You actually came back. Always, he managed, checking his communicator. Rose, status? Multiple successful extractions confirmed, the AI reported. Underground network is reporting 17 rescues so far. Institute security is in complete disarray. However, they're starting to coordinate a wider search pattern. We need to move. James nodded, already leading the way to their hidden vehicle. Send the signal to our friends in the media. Time to shine a very public light on the Institute's research. As they sped through Kara's Prime's industrial sector, emergency vehicles screaming past them toward the Institute, Rhodia finally allowed herself to relax slightly. What happens now? Now we get you somewhere safe, James replied, his eyes on the road. Rose has our exit route planned, and there are people waiting to help you and the others rebuild your lives. After that. He glanced at her. That's up to you. Rhodia's skin shifted through colors before settling on a deep, warm purple. I was a diplomat before they took me. I can help expose what happened here, make sure it doesn't happen to others. James smiled grimly. I was hoping you'd say that. But first, we need to focus on getting off this planet. The real fight's just beginning. Above them, the Kara's Prime sunset painted the sky in shades of fire, as if reflecting the chaos they'd left behind. The Institute's dark secrets were spilling into the light, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. 3 months after the escape from Kara's Prime, James stood at the viewport of the Star Weaver, watching the gleaming spires of the Galactic Council headquarters rise from the surface of New Geneva. Beside him, Rhodia adjusted her formal diplomatic attire, her skin shimmering with determination. The council session begins in 1 hour, Rose announced. Security scans indicate the Crimson Syndicate has agents in the vicinity, but they can't act openly here. James nodded, checking his own formal wear, a far cry from his usual salvage gear. Ready to change the galaxy? Rhodia's skin rippled with a pattern that he'd learned meant wry amusement. One testimony at a time. She turned to face him. You don't have to stay, you know. You've already done more than enough. Actually, I do. He smiled. Someone once told me that sometimes it's not about the odds, it's about doing what's right. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of careful planning and coordinated action. While James and Rhodia had fled Kara's Prime, the underground network had successfully extracted 16 other captives from the Institute. More importantly, they'd secured enough evidence to prove the facility's true nature. The media storm had been immediate and devastating. Anonymous sources had provided journalists with irrefutable proof of the Institute's crimes. Director Venn and several other administrators had been arrested, though many higher-ranking syndicate members had slipped away. The survivors had each chosen their own paths. Some had returned to their homes and families. Others, too changed by their experiences to go back to their old lives, had joined the growing movement to expose and fight trafficking operations across the galaxy. The council chamber hummed with quiet conversation as James and Rhodia took their seats. Representatives from dozens of worlds filled the tiered seating, many of them seeing the real face of trafficking for the first time. The evidence was undeniable: medical records, security footage, financial transactions linking the institute to powerful figures across multiple sectors. Rhodia rose to speak, her voice clear and strong. "Honorable representatives, I come before you not just as a victim, but as a witness. What happened at the Kara's Institute was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern that touches every world represented in this chamber." As she testified, James watched the council members' reactions. Some showed genuine shock and horror. Others shifted uncomfortably, perhaps aware of similar operations in their own territories. A few remained carefully blank-faced, and he made mental notes to investigate their possible connections to the syndicate. "But this is also a story of hope," Rhodia continued. "Of courage shown not just by those who escaped, but by those who chose to help us. One human's decision to act sparked a movement that brought us here today." James felt the weight of several council members' gazes, but kept his expression neutral. He wasn't here for recognition. He was here to support Rhodia and the others as they fought for lasting change. The session lasted for hours as survivor after survivor testified. When the council finally moved to vote on new anti-trafficking measures, the outcome was nearly unanimous. It wasn't a complete victory, laws alone couldn't end the problem, but it was a start. Later, in a quiet garden overlooking the city, James and Rhodia shared a moment of peace. "The syndicate won't give up easily," he noted. "They'll try to find new ways to operate." "I know." Rhodia's skin shifted to a determined bronze. "That's why we won't give up either. The network you helped build is growing. More people are choosing to stand up, to fight back." James nodded thoughtfully. The Starweaver's holds were now filled not with salvage, but with supplies for safe houses and rescue operations. Rose had expanded her capabilities to coordinate with other AI systems, creating an early warning network for trafficking activities. "I received a message from the Andromeda sector," Rhodia said softly. "Another facility, similar to the Institute. The local authorities are compromised, but there's a small group of resistance fighters." "Say no more." James was already pulling up star charts in his mind. "Rose, plot a course for Andromeda. Let's see what kind of trouble we can find." Rhodia's skin rippled with warmth. "You know, in my culture, we have a saying, the brightest stars shine not for themselves, but to guide others home." James thought about the path that had led him here, from a simple salvage mission to something much larger. He thought about the others they'd saved, each now working in their own way to help others. Like stars in the darkness, their light was spreading. "Well then," he said, "we'd better get to work. There are a lot of people out there waiting to find their way home." As they walked back to the Starweaver, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of hope. The ship's systems hummed to life, ready for their next mission. In the end, James reflected, it wasn't about being a hero. It was about making a choice, every day, to stand against the darkness. Rose's voice greeted them as they boarded. Course for Andromeda plotted. New messages arriving from the network. 3 more rescue operations in planning stages. Send word we're available to help, James replied, settling into the pilot's seat. He looked at Rhodia, who had taken the co-pilot's position as if she'd always belonged there. Ready to make the galaxy a little bit better? Her skin glowed with a fierce joy that needed no translation. The Starweaver lifted smoothly into the darkening sky, carrying its crew toward new challenges, new battles, and new opportunities to prove that sometimes the greatest power in the universe was simply the choice to do what was right. Behind them, New Geneva's lights twinkled like stars, a reminder that even the smallest lights could push back the darkness. Somewhere out there, others waited in chains, not knowing if help would ever come. But now, Thanks to one human's choice and the movement it had sparked, they had reason to hope. And sometimes, hope was all you needed to start changing the world.